Good morning, and thank you for enjoying it with a six-pack. The Scotty Six-Pack, your number one podcast for all things Wisconsin sports, 6 days a week. I'm your host, Kedrick Stummeris, and you can follow me on the website, formerly known as Twitter, at Kedrick Stummeris, and follow the podcast at Scotty Six-Pack for the latest updates in all things Wisconsin sports while you're here on your podcast platform of choice or watching on YouTube at youtube.com/@Scotty Six-Pack. Hit the subscribe button, smash that like button, hit the bell so you get notified as soon as we put a new episode in your feed, because we got tons of new content coming at you very quickly. And today we are going to preview this Big Ten matchup between the Wisconsin Badgers and the Michigan Wolverines. And fortunately, we have an excellent guest that we're going to bring on now to do so, Kellen Voss over at Maize and Brew. Thank you so much for joining us, Kellen. Tell folks a little bit about your work, where they can find you on the internet as we preview this elite Big Ten matchup coming up here on Wednesday night.
Well, thank you, Kedrick. I appreciate it. I appreciate you reaching out to me over the website formerly known as Twitter to do this. I cover the men's and women's basketball teams over at Maize and Brew, an SB Nation site, covering all things Michigan Wolverines. We got basketball coverage, football coverage, recruiting coverage, non-revenue sports. We try to focus on Michigan as much as we can, and there's been a lot of Michigan sports news, especially over the last 4 or 5 months. But unfortunately, most of the news surrounding the men's basketball team has not been good. So we can get into that a little bit today.
Yeah, not good is probably the way I would describe it. You know, I was looking at Michigan and Wisconsin and settled on thinking about these two teams as coming from a very similar place last year, as two teams that kind of were just fringy, maybe not necessarily the first four, the next four teams out of the NCAA tournament, but fringy NCAA tournament teams go to the NIT, each win a game or two. But then after that, nothing has been the same. UW, of course, has responded by positioning itself as one of the best teams in the Big Ten. Michigan is doing something different than that. Last place in the conference. Michigan, this is what I found astounding. Michigan basketball has won one game since December 17th.
Mm-hmm. and that one game was Ohio State, so that does give Michigan fans some happiness. Yeah.
And then last time out, Michigan collapsed in the second half, allowing just an awful Rutgers offense, like sub 300 Rutgers offense by adjusted offensive efficiency, according to Ken Pom, to erase a huge deficit in the second half and still lose by 10. I don't want to feel like I'm just rubbing it all in on you. So I say all this to ask, like, what are the vibes in Ann Arbor right now? Because I find this all very confusing for a program that, when Juwan Howard first took it over, seemed like everything was very, very, very much on the up and up.
Yeah. The vibes are not good, to put it simply. It's been real bad in terms of what Michigan basketball has been doing lately. Juwan actually had some very good seasons to start. You know, took the team to the Elite Eight. Had another team that barely made the NCAA tournament, but still made the Sweet 16. And the last 2 years have not been great. Obviously, they missed the NCAA tournament last year. I think they were like 3-17 in game decided by 6 points or less last year, some crazy statistic. And this year, the wheels of all just have fallen off. They've lost their last 5 straight. They've lost 10 of the last 11. Like you said, they have 1 win since mid-December. They're just a really bad basketball team, and they're now literally at the bottom of the Big Ten standings. Statistically, they're pretty much at the worst or second worst in terms of all major categories across the Big Ten. It's been real bleak all season long. I wish I could be more optimistic for you, but it's just, I mean, it's a number of factors, and they're just the vibes are not good. The vibes are not good, and I can't say that I'm optimistic about this matchup against a really good Wisconsin team.
Yeah, I think the one thing that maybe you can hang your hat on here is neither one of these teams, Wisconsin or Michigan, has won on the opposing team's home court since Valentine's Day of 2021. Even
wow.
A year before. Yeah, a little bit surprising.
What is that? Okay.
Yeah, I wrote that in a piece before the season started, when I actually picked Michigan to win this game, despite, the roster questions that Michigan has.
Right.
And I think that those roster questions have kind of reared their head in a way that have become pretty negative. Of course, a lot of turnover on the roster. Hunter Dickinson, the big man down low, is gone. It all starts there, of course. Hunter Dickinson actually, transferring to Kansas, which is where my dad went to school. So I have very, very mixed feelings about that.
Yeah.
But there's other folks beyond Dickinson, Jet Howard to the NBA, Kobe Buffkin to the NBA. And in another way that I think these two teams were finished in the same place last year, but have gone different places this year, Wisconsin returned most of its production from last year, one of the teams with the highest returning production. Michigan, one of the teams with the lowest amount of returning production from last year's roster. But I thought Michigan added at least one really solid piece to the roster, and that's Olivier Nkamhoua, who is a guy that I really liked going back to when he was at Tennessee. So what does this big man bring down low for the Michigan roster, and how is he trying to supplant that Hunter Dickinson sized hole at the center?
Well, I mean, it's pretty impossible to replace the hole that Hunter Dickinson left, right? I mean, he was the leading scorer and the leading rebounder for Michigan all 3 of his seasons that he played. It's unrealistic expectation to expect anybody to fill that void. One of the few positives of this season has been Olivier Nkamhoua. He tested the NBA waters before this year, decided to come back, had a really solid career at Tennessee, transferred to Michigan. And now he's in a role that he's never really been in, where he's kind of the go-to guy for Michigan in a lot of games. He's their second leading scorer. It's just under 16 points per game, playing more minutes than he ever has in his career. I'm just really, really impressed by him, especially offensively. He's really good. He's an old school player. He's very good in the mid range. He's very good in the mid post. Has a solid turnaround jumper. He's very athletic. He can catch a lot of lobs at the rim. He's very good in the paint area. And just his experience, his college basketball experience has helped Michigan in a lot of games. There's a lot of games where he'll be the only source of offense for a large stretch of time. And he's admitted that it's a role that he's never played before in his college basketball career. He admitted that to us after the Ohio State win a few weeks ago. But he's a really, really, really solid player. I think in an ideal world, he should be your 3rd or 4th best player, like what he was in Tennessee. He kind of feels a little overstretched right now in Michigan. His defense has been okay. He's really good at handling guys in the post, really physical, doesn't protect the rim super well, but he's a good rebounder, good energy guy. Michigan's defense as a whole has been a dumpster fire. We'll get into that later. But Nkamhoua has been one of the few positives for this Michigan team. And I think that him and the other transfers, Namari Burnett and Trey Jackson, have just been put into roles where they're in bigger roles than they ever have been before, and there's just so much asked of them with how badly everything else has gone with this Michigan team that I think they're working at disadvantage. They're batting with 2 strikes, as you'd say. But Nkamhoua's been really solid for Michigan, and I enjoy watching him. And I'd be interested to see if he ends up getting a cup of coffee somewhere in the pros. He tested the NBA waters last year, and he's improved drastically. Since then, could improve his 3-point shot a little bit, but he's a really solid player.
Yeah, I think about Nkamhoua in kind of a similar vein. Like their games are pretty different, but one of the ways that you talk about he's not necessarily an elite rim protector, I think about him in the same kind of vein as Wisconsin starting center Stephen Crowell, who is a great starting center, isn't necessarily a rim protector, but like Nkamhoua can step out and shoot the 3 at times, right? 35-ish% three-point shooter, and is solid. And you talk about some of these other transfer pieces along with him, right? Feels like the plan for Juwan Howard was like Namari Burnett is a former McDonald's All-American out of high school, right? Very, very high pedigree,
right?
Recruit. Feels like the idea for this roster was, okay, maybe let's go out and get some of these, once very shiny toys and see if there's any extra juice that Michigan can pump out of them here. And it just hasn't quite happened in the way that you would hope it would.
I mean, Juwan is a really good recruiter. I think he's in a college basketball landscape where a lot of coaches have not embraced the transfer portal. I think he's done a great job of doing that. I think he's done a great job acquiring talent in a vacuum. Like all these guys on paper are really, really good. I just don't think the roster construction is very good. I mean, you look at Michigan's main rotation of 7-8 guys, half of them are power forwards. That's kind of the disadvantage that Kamwa's at, is that, yes, you talk about Kamwa as a big man, and ideally he probably should be at the 5 and be your only big man on the floor. But he shares the floor with Terrace Reed all the time. And Terrace Reed's a solid player, but he kind of has to share the floor with Terrace Reed based on how this roster is constructed. There's not a lot of time where he's not playing with another big in Terrace Reed or Will Cheddar. And I think that puts him at a little bit of a disadvantage. I think his ideal role would be as like a small ball 5, kind of creating some offense and doing well in the mid post and that kind of a thing. But yeah, I mean, the knock on Jawan in terms of his recruitment is he's a good recruiter. Like there's been some Caleb Houston, Musa Diabate are some of the highest ranked recruits Michigan's ever pulled in. But those guys don't really fit together in terms of roster construction.
Yeah, it's almost, and I know that I've talked about this in this conversation as Kamwa as the starting center. It's weird thinking about him not in that position, although just because Terrace Reed feels so young compared to the other guys at like the 2, 3, 4 in the middle there, where he almost kind of gets lost. It's strange. But as we go from, down low in the post, let's take it out to the perimeter. And there's, the one shiny toy that Michigan has still on this roster is Doug McDaniel, starting point guard, sophomore, steps in for Jaden Llewellyn, who I know is still kind of trying to get his feet under him here. But it seems, as always, there's just weirdness going on at Michigan over the last couple of years. There is this weird Doug McDaniel just doesn't play road games because he has this weird academic suspension, which allows him to play at home games and still be part of the team, but not play on road games, which is weird. But beyond that, Doug McDaniel plays out of his mind sometimes and is, I think, probably the best player on this team by a step or two.
I would agree. Yeah.
Okay. So although he is a young point guard, is probably, making sure that he does not overstep himself, making sure that he is protecting his NBA draft stock at this point. I mean, what does this team look like with Doug McDaniel, and is the team's success tied kind of directly to his individual success on a game-by-game basis?
Yeah. The suspension you mentioned is very weird. It's very peculiar. We got the thing come down on it. He actually posted about it on social media himself, saying that he was going to be out for the next 6 games. And then there was a release from the team that basically said that he would be suspended indefinitely. He's not reaching team standards in terms of academics, which, if he's allowed to play and he's playing in home games, and that would mean he's still eligible to play from an academic standpoint, but he's not meeting team standards in terms of his grades and stuff. So yeah, he hasn't been playing in road games. When he's been the lone bright spot for them a lot of this year. I think he had 34, 35 points in the Oregon loss in double OT. He can just catch fire in an instant. He's lightning quick. He's got a really nice first step. He finishes around the rim really well. He's gotten a lot better at playing fast under control. Like he does a good job jump stopping and shooting and getting to the mid range and making threes. And he's really one of the only catalysts that can create offense for Michigan, which in a season as bad as it's been, like that's been a crucial thing to have. And so not having him in road games, I understand why the team did it. Like you have to have some standards in terms of your academics and stuff. But in terms of the on-court product, it's weird not having him in road games. And the offense just looks completely inept at times in road games when he's not there. Jalen Llewellyn's been solid at times. He was a really, really nice player at Princeton, has played a lot of college basketball. And he is coming off an ACL tear he tore it in the London game they played against Kentucky last year around like the start of December last year. So he's just now like getting fully recovered from his ACL tear. And he's looked really, really solid. He doesn't have that burst that Doug McDaniel does, but he's really crafty, really shifty, can move the ball really well. But he's not the shot creator that Doug McDaniel is. And when you look at the rest of this roster, those two guys are really the only two guys that are good at creating shots for other people. And that is a concern for a Michigan team that has struggled to consistently create buckets. They routinely will have stretches where they'll go 5, 6, 7 game minutes without a made field goal. I think in the Rutgers loss, they only had 6 total points in the final 10 minutes of the game. Like the offense will be so good to start the game. They'll get off to these super hot starts. They'll be leading at the half, and then the wheels will come off in the second half. And you'll see the body language go down, and you'll see the woe is me looks, and you'll see them, banging their head against the wall offensively, and it never comes to fruition. And that's been one of the more frustrating parts of watching this Michigan team. They've had a lead in 20. Here's a fun game for you. I'm going to see if you can guess this. They've had a lead in 22 games this season at the half.
Okay.
How many of those games do you think they've won?
Well, they've only won 7. So, oh goodness, 22 and they've led. And so they've led at half in every single game this year?
No, they've led at they've led at half. I think they've led at half 22 games this year. Or no, 15, sorry. They've led at half 15 of 20, sorry. 15 of 22 games this year, they've led at the half. They've only won 7 of those games. So when they're leading at the half, they have a success rate of less than 50%, which is crazy because most teams, when they're leading at the half, they can continue the good things going on in the second half, can ride the lead they have. Every lead they have just crumbles in the second half. If you're betting money line and the other team in a game that Michigan has is leading, you're going to be making a lot of money. That's been the most impressive thing about this Michigan team is they've been good to start out games, but they can never finish, and it's always a struggle in the second half.
They've led at the half in 15 games, but somehow still have 15 losses. Is quite
exactly. Yeah.
Oh, that is a lot of fun. All right. Well, so in terms of the other pieces on the roster here, we started this by talking about the roster turnover. Kobe Buffkin, Jet Howard out to the NBA. You replace those pieces on the wing with Namari Bennett and Terrence Williams. On the bench, Michigan doesn't have a ton going on. Granted, Wisconsin doesn't have a lot of going on the bench either. Michigan didn't have a lot going on the bench last year either.
Right.
But what is the effect of having this Michigan bench being one of the thinnest in the country, and how does that affect them going down? Maybe that is part of the reason that this Michigan team struggles in these late game situations as they get into the second half.
Oh, it's absolutely part of the issue, right? Like, and you Michigan's rolled with an 8-man rotation most of the season, right? And when you take Doug McDaniel out of the mix, that's a 7-man rotation. So any sort of foul trouble, Michigan just completely withers, and that's part of the reason why they've been struggling in the second half of games, right? I will say Terrence Williams in his senior season has been a lot better than he's having a career year. He's shooting incredibly well from 3. He's kind of lost his confidence a little bit last year and is starting to gain it back a little bit. He's been really, really solid for Michigan. But in terms of the bench, you have Will Cheddar, who is kind of a tweener 4-5, is shooting really well from 3-point on a super, super small percentage. I think at one point he was leading the Big Ten in 3-point percentage, but it was on like 20 shots. So it's a super small percentage, but he hits them when he can. Trey Jackson, he's been a fine wing. Can put the ball on the floor a little, defends pretty well, shoots the 3 okay, but that's pretty much it in a lot of these games. Llewellyn will come off the bench in home games, but on the road he's starting, and then you have Cheddar and Jackson as your 2 main guys off the bench, and that 7 plays the majority of the minutes. You'll occasionally get some from Yusuf Kayet, you'll occasionally get some from George Washington, but that's pretty much it. And I think you're exactly right. I think that their lack of depth has been a big issue over this year and last year. And it's been any sort of foul trouble. They're forced to put guys on the floor who are good players in a vacuum, but can't, don't fit well together and can't create their own shots. And it's just been a recipe for disaster in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I think that there's 2 directions that a roster can most of the times be, right? You can be not very deep, but at least you have some top end experience, or you can be, pretty deep, but you're deep with a young roster, and that's good and the bad. I think Michigan is in the very unfortunate position where Michigan is not very deep and it is barely top 200 in D1 experience, according to Ken Pom. Well, Wisconsin is not super deep, but at least has a lot of experience, basically brought back the entire team last year. It's another one of this weird ways that I think these paths for Wisconsin and Michigan, converged at the end of last year, but have diverged since.
Yeah, and I don't mean to be harsh towards Michigan, but like the reason why Wisconsin plays well with a short bench is that Wisconsin can trust their top 6, top 7 guys, right? That's kind of the ideal world that you should be in college basketball. You should have, the adage can be sometimes, play 8, trust 7, or play 9, trust 8. I think Wisconsin's done a really good job of that this whole season with AJ Storr and a lot of the pieces that they brought back. They've been super good at that. The problem with Michigan is the guys on the floor. You can't trust them a lot of games. With Burnett, there will be some games where he'll in the St. John's game he went off for 21 points in the first half, and there'll be some games where Burnett will play 25, 30 minutes. You'll be like, I kind of forgot that Burnett was out there. He's had 4 points, 6 points, and he hasn't really done a whole lot. It's just inconsistency across the board for this Michigan team, unfortunately, and that's been another big issue. Is they have a good offense and they can execute well at times, but they can never do it for a whole game. They can never put together for a whole stretch of a game.
Yeah, well, let's get into what this game is going to look like in just a second. Here, we're going to take a quick break for our friends of the show over at TickPick, but then we'll bring Kellen right back. Want to tell y'all about TickPick because TickPick is where I buy all of my tickets to every sporting event that I would like to go to. And in fact, I was looking just yesterday, and I want to make sure that this is right because the number is a little bit absurd. If you would like to go to this Wisconsin Badgers versus, oh God, it's gotten worse. This Wisconsin-Michigan game in Ann Arbor, TickPick can get you there from $2. $2 gets you in the door. All in pricing at TickPick. I don't even need to click through to checkout because TickPick does not believe in hidden fees. If you go to TickPick, the price you see is the price that you're going to get. And if you use my link that you see on the screen now, my link in the podcast description, I'm going to save you $10 on your first order as well. So go to the Google Play Store, go to the Apple App Store, download the TickPick app. That's TickPick. Click my link in the podcast description, save $10 on your first order of $99 or more, and you will never pay service or delivery fees for tickets to sporting events, concerts, ever again. All right, let's bring Kellen back in here. Kellen, $2 to go to the Michigan game tomorrow. Is that money that you think is better spent on something else?
I mean, $2 to see this really good Wisconsin team and to see a Michigan team compete for a whole first half, I think is a worthwhile purchase. They'll play well for a whole 35 minutes of game time. So you can't beat that.
Not bad. It's $80 to get into the game at Jersey Mike's Arena this upcoming weekend as Wisconsin takes on Rutgers. We have another guest lined up to preview that show later on this week. But let's finish talking about this Michigan-Wisconsin matchup here. I think if we're talking about what is most wrong with this Michigan team, I think it starts with the defense. And the defense doesn't force turnovers. They are a relatively good 3-point defense in terms of, like, they don't let teams shoot many of them, but they, let teams make them, but they by and large chase teams off of the 3-point line. I think that's maybe something that's good for Wisconsin, considering Wisconsin has been in quite a bit of a 3-point shooting slump of late. They went 0 of 11 in the second half of the Purdue game, didn't shoot them very well against Nebraska either, and took a ton of them. So what's going on with this Michigan defense? It's not that I've necessarily thought about Michigan in recent years as a, defense first team by any means, but what's wrong with the Michigan defense?
Can I say everything? Is that a fair answer? It's been pretty bad. So on KenPom, they are the 186th in the country in terms of adjusted defense. They are allowing 78.8 points per game. Out of 351 Division I college men's college basketball teams, that's 325th. So they are 26th worst in terms of points allowed per game, which is not good. They are the worst in all of the Big Ten in terms of defense. They've given up more points than anybody else in the Big Ten. And it's a number of issues, right? I think it stems from they have there's miscommunications all over the place. You'll see guys, pointing and yelling after made shots and ones and that kind of a thing. They don't close out well. They don't rotate well. Their on-ball defense is not great. As great as Doug McDaniel is as an offensive scorer, a lot of teams will take advantage of him as an on-ball defender because a lot of guards he faces are bigger than he is and can outmuscle him, and B, he doesn't stay in front of guys really well. So in that initial point of attack, guys are getting in the lane and kicking it out, and Michigan's not rotating and recovering very well off of that. They have size; they can defend okay, and when teams get into the paint. But you'll often see in these second half collapses where the wheels will come off, where teams will go on these 8.80 runs, 10-0 runs, and they'll all of a sudden shots at the rim will get a whole lot easier. And I think it's just kind of a compounding issue where once they have a few mistakes, they just continue to have those mistakes. They play really bad defense off their own makes. Like once they make threes and teams will just run down the floor and score almost instantaneously on them. They don't move up the floor super well. Their transition defense is awful. They're really, really bad defensively. And they've continued to be bad defensively all year long. No lead they have this season is safe, partially because of how bad their defense has been. I think that's a big reason why they've lost a lot of their first half leads is they're unable to lock down the paint and unable to lock down the three-point line. Like you said, they don't give up a ton of threes, but the threes they do get up are often wide open shots because they're not rotating super well. Teams will move the ball against them, and they'll just give up wide open corner threes all over the place. Happened again in the Iowa loss, happened in the Illinois loss, it's pretty much happened in every single conference loss this season. And it's been really, really frustrating because a lot of times you see defenses in college basketball improve as the season's gone along, and it's almost gotten worse as the season's gone along, which is just mind-boggling in terms of to think of. I think that they're really bad execution-wise, and I don't understand their defensive game plan most of the time. Well, but other than that, they're doing great.
Well, there's been times that Michigan has gone to this zone at certain points of the year too, which I don't understand why when you have like this young team that has some level of like talent and pedigree and athleticism too. It's just a weird coaching decision, but I think it shows they're just trying anything at this point.
Yeah. Part of that's just throwing crap at the wall and hoping it sticks, right? Yeah. They're pretty, like, in terms of like on paper, they're very long, they're very tall, they're a very big team. And so in theory, zone would work if they actually put effort into it and actually used it for more than a few possessions. I think it's just they just try to mix it up to try to keep defenses guessing. And their zone possessions have actually been not terrible in terms of defensively, but they don't stay in it for super long. And I think it's mostly just to cover up how terrible their man-to-man defense has been. I don't think there's a single. I'm trying to be nice here, but I don't think there's a single Michigan player who's like a good on-ball defender, except maybe Kamwa and occasionally Terrace Reed. That is one thing I will give Terrace credit for. He is really, really good at switching onto guards and guarding them in terms of on-ball. He famously, his first game last season that he got big minutes, in the Iowa game, he actually guarded Chris Murray and was guarding Chris Murray like out on the perimeter for a large portion of the game. And that's when Michigan fans were like, oh, this guy can actually do something. He's a post player that's guarding one of the best guys in the Big Ten like this. And so he and Kamwa are really good in terms of their ability on guards. I think just the rest of the team it's like once the team gets a few easy buckets going and a run starts going, you see the body language drop. You see the woe is me looks on guys' faces. You see the defense just continue to collapse. And that's been part of the reason why Michigan's been as bad as they have all year long.
Well, fortunately, I think maybe the Wisconsin defense is also the weak point of this team. It's certainly, I mean, I've talked about all year how if Wisconsin is going to win the Big Ten, it comes from their offense, because the offense defense split in terms of, quality and by the advanced metrics is just so much wider than the offense defense split by some of the other top teams in the Big Ten. Wisconsin has a far worse defense than Illinois, than Purdue, for example, despite Wisconsin having like this top 10 offense, which has been interesting. But I think there are real strengths of the Michigan offense then for the Wolverines to take advantage of from the Badgers. And we talked about before the show, right? Michigan can kind of shoot some threes when they want to shoot them. They don't shoot a ton of threes, but they typically make them when they do. What are some of the strengths of this Michigan offense? How do you envision them maybe being able to take advantage of Wisconsin here?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say one of the things that they are very good at is 3-point shooting. You know, they shoot 36.9% from three, which is actually 41st in the country. I think it's like second or third in the Big Ten. Like you said, they don't shoot a ton of threes, but when they get threes, they often make them. You know, Terrence Williams, and then part of that is Terrence Williams been shooting really well. Will Cheddar's been shooting really well off the bench. That brings the number up quite a bit. Trey Jackson has been pretty solid there. Doug McDaniel he's like a microwave. He hits one or two of them. He's gonna keep shooting and he's gonna keep making them. Burnett's very hit or miss when it comes to that, but when he's on, he's on. Like I said, they when their offense is clicking and when Doug McDaniel can get the drive initiated and they can move the ball and get a few passes and get to the open man, they look pretty fearsome, right? Like they on paper, like there are moments where it's like, oh, this team can actually do something, right? When you have Doug McDaniel drive it, you have Kamwat doing stuff in the mid post, and you have 3-point shooters like helping to space the floor there. The problem is we don't see that look super often. They'll be great for those little 3-minute, 4-minute, 5-minute stretches, and they'll go on a little run, and opposing coach will call a timeout, and Kreisel will get really loud. But then they can't sustain that. And that's been the issue, is they'll have these little bursts where they're super, super good. And then they'll just go right back to their ways of turning the ball over and you know, they don't really take dumb shots a lot of the time, but like turn the ball over and missing shots and not getting the rebound. And it just continues and continues to compound on itself. This team just has the confidence of this team is just completely shot. And I think that's a big issue with this offense. But yeah, they're pretty good at shooting threes.
I think that the point you made there at the end about the turnovers is something that I noticed right away about this Michigan team, where if you have kind of like the scatter plot XY axis, Michigan is falling in this really unfortunate bottom left quadrant where the offense turns the ball over quite a bit, but the defense doesn't generate turnovers at all. Right. Basically, it is this. I mean, kind of like we talked about how Michigan is neither deep nor experienced. It is one of these places where just everything is kind of compounded in the wrong way for the Wolverines this season. But
I think they've gotten better at taking care of the ball as the years gone along. But like you said, they don't force a ton of turnovers, so that doesn't really matter late in games a lot of the time. They have gotten better at taking care of the ball, but it has still been a sticking point with this offense. So they'll oftentimes shoot themselves in the foot. That's probably the one knock I have on Llewellyn is he shouldn't, you know. I think his ideal role should be as an off-ball two-guard who occasionally runs the offense. In terms of asking him to completely play the point when Doug McDaniel is out, he'll oftentimes turn the ball over and kind of get overwhelmed by three-quarter court, half-court pressure, and that will lead to a couple easy buckets. That's how they lost the Maryland game on the road, is Maryland just got up in his face, got up to an 8-point lead once getting off those turnovers, and Michigan never really recovered from that point. And that those kind of moments happen too often this year.
Yeah, I was looking at this exact thing between Doug McDaniel and Jaden Llewellyn, and Llewellyn does definitely turn the ball over more. And like you said earlier, he's the number one point guard in some of these road games. I went and looked at the turnover rate on KenPom. He's turning the ball over almost twice as often as Doug McDaniel. Yeah. It's shocking.
Which especially because he's not playing as much minutes too. So it's like you would think that he's turning over the ball less. But in these road games when he's asked to play almost the majority of the game as the point guard, it will look good at times, but it will just like the wheels will eventually fall off. And when he's out of the game and Burnett is asked to play point guard, ooh man, that is you want to talk about that is even worse when it comes to that. I feel like I'm being the Debbie Downer of this whole podcast. It's just there's not a lot of good to talk about with what we've seen so far this year, unfortunately.
Well, let's try to make some good out of it. Doug McDaniel is going to be available for this one. It is a home game for Michigan. Let's try to get somewhere positive for Michigan here, because I think there is a path that Michigan can win this game. I think it involves them maybe trying to shoot a higher volume of threes and making them, but Michigan wins this game if what happens? One or two reasons here.
I think Michigan wins this game if they make their 3-pointers, right? Like they shoot better, like most teams, they shoot way better at home, especially Terrence Williams. If they make their 3-pointers early and they can get out to a 10, 12, 15-point lead at some point in the first half and continue to build on that, that would be how they win this game. I am expecting some sort of second half collapse because that's pretty much happened in almost every single conference game they've played this year is some sort of second half collapse where the wheels will come off. But they need to make their threes and they need to not turn the ball over. And I think if they do those two things, then they actually have a shot in this game offensively to compete with Wisconsin. Defensively, I don't necessarily know if I trust them. Just the idea of having to have them guard AJ Storr is kind of scary. But it is, they need to make their threes and they need to not turn the ball over. And if they do those two things, they have a shot. If they don't do both those things, they lose this game by 15 or 20 points. And it's another embarrassment. And it's Juwan being mad in the presser. And it's another familiar territory for Michigan. So,
well, I think that's a recipe that could work. I think Wisconsin probably has a good recipe to win this game. I think it starts with getting Steven Crowell going. He's had a couple of rough games at starting center at these last two outings. Against Nebraska and Purdue, which, both took away the paint, but Michigan doesn't have a 7-footer on its roster.
Right.
You've got a 7-foot Steven Crowell. I think this is a good opportunity for him for a get right game against Michigan if they can go out and take it. But that's what I would hope for. A little bit of better shot selection by AJ Storr. You mentioned obviously he's a weapon. He got a little bit benched in the last 2.5 minutes against Purdue this weekend.
Yeah, okay. I did notice
Gard,
that. Yeah.
Greg Gard got a little ticked off with AJ Storr about some of the wild shots that he was taking, which that's kind of part of his game. You have to take a little bit of the good with the bad when you have a player who has that kind of burst. But Greg Gard has also kind of preached the shot selection question at more times during the year.
Yeah.
I asked him in a post-game presser back in December or something about AJ Storr's shot selection and his growth, and his answer was he's learning what a good shot is. I guess he has not quite learned that lesson yet.
Okay.
But I think it'll be a good test against maybe a worse Michigan defense, where if AJ Storr can really drive to the rim and do something there, that'll be good for this Wisconsin offense to get a little bit right, get back on the right track after back-to-back losses. Kellen, before we wrap up here, are there any other questions about this matchup you wish I had asked you, or any other things you want to get off your chest about this game before it's off Wednesday night?
I think we covered pretty much everything about this game. I wanted to ask you about how you feel about the long-term future of this Wisconsin team. It's looking like the Big Ten is going to get about 6 teams in the NCAA tournament. In terms of what you've seen, I like this Wisconsin team a lot. In terms of what you've seen, do you think this is a Wisconsin team that can make a little bit of a run once March Madness starts?
Yeah, I think this is a second weekend team. From there, I kind of took a lesson from my dad a handful of years back, which is I think the reasonable ceiling for the Wisconsin basketball program, given their recruiting limitations of being in Wisconsin, of not necessarily being a blue blood program, but having a relative amount of moderate success, is I think the goal every year basically is to reach the Sweet 16.
Okay.
Everything after that is gravy, and you're at that point competing against the best of the best. It's not that this team is going to make the Sweet 16 every year. I think that's an unreasonable expectation, but I think that's a good place to set this was a really awesome season if Wisconsin makes the Sweet 16. Anything more than that is probably something you can't quite ask for. And I think that this team is, set up for that. If they had won against Purdue, I think we're talking about this as a real Elite Eight, maybe even Final Four contender. But I think this is a second weekend team. Anything after that is going to be awesome. I think they could win a game in the second weekend. I think maybe they could win 2 games in the second weekend if things break their way. But I'm excited to see it. I think even more long-term, I think this team's going to be even better next year. They bring back everybody except for Tyler Wall, assuming AJ Storr doesn't go to the NBA. But I think things are looking right in Madison. And if they can finish second or third in the Big Ten, get a double bye, you never know what might happen that weekend leading into Selection Sunday. I think it should be a
In
good,
terms of
fun month and a half.
In terms of the last Big Ten team remaining in the NCAA tournament, I think it's going to be either them or Michigan State. In terms of what I've seen this year, it's hard to trust. It's hard to trust Purdue in terms of their track record with upsets and stuff. I don't love this Illinois team. Nebraska's pretty fun. Northwestern's pretty fun.
Yeah.
They could each win a game or so. But I think Wisconsin and Michigan State are the two teams that have the staying power to where it wouldn't surprise me if those two teams are just in the Elite Eight. Like it would not surprise me if either of them make a surprise run. So
I am a Purdue believer personally. I think we've seen them against some of the best teams that we've considered at times the best in the country. They've beaten an Arizona, they've beaten a Tennessee, they've beaten a Marquette. And the bigger question marks about that team last year, the conversation was, they have Zach Edey. They have all these really young guards. Those really young guards have gotten a heck of a lot better. Braden Smith is maybe the best point guard in the country. Fletcher Loyer is an awesome piece. Lance Jones is a huge upgrade on the wing for them.
Totally.
I think that Purdue team is, at least one big step better than it was last year. Make your Fairleigh Dickinson jokes. I understand to the general populace, but I think this Purdue team is a different thing than it was last year.
Yeah, this is in terms of on paper. We can wrap up after this, but in terms of on paper, I think this is the best team that Matt Painter's ever had in terms of Purdue, in terms of what they're able to execute, what they've been able to prove themselves in top competition. The fact they can play a guy like Mason Gillis off the bench just shows how good their starting lineup has been. And I wish I was rooting for a team as fun as Purdue or Wisconsin, because this Michigan team is not very fun to watch.
All right. One last fun question I wanted to ask you is that I came up with this little matrix here that you can see on the screen that our viewers on YouTube can see on the screen.
Okay.
Big Ten unveiled its new scheduling proposal or new schedule format where they're going to stick at 20 games. You're going to play all 17 opponents in the Big Ten, but then you're going to have 3 extra games. Sounds like they're going to rotate those 3 extra games year by year. I don't like that. I think what's the point of playing a home and home with every team in the Big Ten, whatever that is, every 6 years, then you play at that point. You're not even guaranteed to do that. I think take the giant Big Ten, do something to preserve some kind of regionality, some rivalry. You're still going to be playing every team in the conference once a year. I think it's good. All right. So meanwhile, I've said, let's have 3 permanent Big Ten basketball rivals. Here they are. For Michigan, you're going to play Michigan State, Ohio State, and Northwestern twice a year.
That's perfect. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Perfect.
We have a
I would stick it at that. I would think about throwing Illinois in Northwestern's place. There's been a weird rivalry with Michigan Illinois fans over the last few years. Yeah. Illinois fans, I'm sure you've dealt with this. Illinois fans, for no reason at all, are just extremely cocky about everything, and it just ticks me off to high hell. And I think they had a streak where they never. I don't think Dickinson ever beat them. So that they were in our mentions all the time about that. But I would maybe throw Illinois in there. But yeah, Michigan State, Ohio State, and then Northwestern, Illinois probably would be fine. I'd be fine facing Wisconsin a lot too. I think they play well against Wisconsin. There's obviously the ski mask thing with Dickinson last year, and the scumbag comments he made on his podcast, I think made for a little bit of a budding rivalry. But yeah, I think you hit it on the head. Michigan State, Ohio State with Northwestern would probably be
that's
fine.
good. I said before the season, and unfortunately some of the air has been taken out of it with the general state of Michigan this year. I did say before the season, this is the new hot rivalry in college basketball. Maybe it's just taking a year off. I don't know.
Maybe. Who knows?
But all right, Kellen, this has been awesome. Thank you very much for joining. I know we've gone a little bit long, but take some time, tell people where to find more of your work, because I think that you're going to have great stuff coming out very soon. For sure. Thank you so much for having me, Kedrick. I appreciate you reaching out. And I'm going to now look at your Wisconsin coverage more after this. I think this is a really fun, really good podcast. All the podcasts where people go long, it tends to be good content. So I would say go ahead and follow me at Kellen __ Voss on Twitter. I write for Maize and Brew, mostly the men's basketball team, a little bit of women's coverage, a little bit of recruiting stuff, a little bit of football stuff. And then just check out Maize and Brew, the site as a whole, on SB Nation's page. We got Michigan stuff every day, Charlie churning out anywhere from 6 to 10 articles a day.
If you're a Michigan fan listening to this, I highly recommend you go to our site. It's a great place to get free Michigan news, notes, reactions to stuff, everything. Our podcast, Out of the Blue Pod, has been really good. A lot of our podcasts have been solid. And I'm not looking forward to this game because I'm expecting Michigan to lose by double digits, but I am looking forward to watching this Wisconsin basketball team again because they are a lot of fun. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you, Kellen. We're going to wrap up here. Thank you all for listening to the Scotty Six Pack podcast. I've been your host, Kedrick Stumberis. You can find me on the website formerly known as Twitter at Kedrick Stumberis. Follow the podcast at Scotty Six Pack. While you're here, leave a nice review, 5 stars, kind comments. Really, really, really does help the show. And tomorrow, we're going to be wrapping up this game. We're going to be talking Rutgers later on in the week. Until then, on Wisconsin.